So I reviewed the TBM 900 from HotStart back when it was in its early beta phase, and now that it is released, and you can find the link to it in the description below, thought it was time to do yet another review. And once again, I'll be using the checklist that I use in the real thing. They worked hard to model it after what it's like in real life, and so the checklist is entirely usable. So the first thing we'll do is we'll start outside the aircraft. So that was the static wicks covers up here on these little black static wicks, and the pitos down below. There's one on each side. I just clicked it on this one side to get it off of there. And then the plugs for the various intakes and the exhaust stacks. You just click in the main engine intake there to get all of those off of there. And then normally during the walk around, we'd look in here. That's not modeled. But we'd make sure that the oil level was good, all the hoses and everything, nothing was damaged. Similarly over here, we check the hydraulic level right up in the front. Make sure the little can for the brake fluid looks correct. We'd walk around, go down here, make sure we've got about 3 fingers worth of the strut showing, and that the tire pressures are good. They're pretty hard to check visually though. When they're really low, you can tell. I like to look in here. They've got a fair bit of stuff modeled here, but looking for any kind of damage, anything weird that's abnormal. Oh, no, it didn't get this pitot cover. Grab that. One of the things I check on the real one here, stall warning down here, this little tab. I don't know what the touch click there is for, but just make sure that's not broken off and then it moves freely. Just be really gentle with it. And then also check that the fuel caps are closed properly and that they're pretty flush with the wing. And this looks great in the model here. In the real thing, you can put these in and kind of put the latch down and have them not quite seated just right. And then when that happens, it's really hard to get the latch back up again to reseat it. Sometimes you even need some pliers to do that. But I like to check that and make sure there's properly sealed up there. Continue our walk around. We would normally look in here, check the oxygen tank level, take the static ports plugs out, and we could check in here for the ELT just to make sure the wiring and all that looks good. I usually just check that maybe once a month. And we would normally lift the elevators up like that. Take a look in here at some drain holes for some of the condensation that might go in some little boots for the trim actuators. We're looking at the condition of just all the black boots for de-icing the antennas and so forth. Make sure the light back here is okay. Same idea on this side. And work our way around. They did a great job with the animation for the door. It swings up on its own, stairs come out, and then they have finished up all of the interior modeling here. You can open up the table, do all the window shades, which is really fun. You can even open up these little cubbies. I keep various little things in here, seatbelt extenders and extra headset pieces, like extra cable adapters, stuff like that. To close it, just like the real thing, you don't have to lift up the stairs yourself. You just hold that. Normally it wouldn't, in the real world, it wouldn't motor the stairs up for you. You would do that by hand, but it would bring the door down. And then you just close it with the handle. Again, check the struts, about 3 fingers worth of height visible there. Looking at the flaps. Normally we'd work the ailerons, see that the spoilers come up and they even recess a little bit. We'd look in here, check for the grease on all these cables and fittings and so forth. Check the security of all this. Make sure there's no damage for any of the lights. Nothing weird on the radar. The radome. Check this cap. And that's the exterior walk around. Now they have a place here in the payload view where you can make sure you've taken all these off, and for these they do come in pairs, so that makes it really simple. And also has a nice weight and balance here. And we click this, check the fuel, and if we look over, fuel cap's sitting there, undone, and then we can put it back in. So we've got full tanks on both sides. So let's hop in, close the door, and let's start running the interior checklist. So our exterior pre-flight's complete. I have a couple of just personal things I threw in here for setting home thermostats depending on what kind of traveling I'm doing and texting anybody that needs to know about my travels. Make sure that the doors are closed and locked, and they look good. We'll check for the CAS message later for that. Seat belts, that's fine. Passenger oxygen switch is off, which is the normal. We turn on the pilot oxygen switch, and then the masks, you would push the test button to check these. They've actually modeled being able to put it on, so you grab it, pull it out of here, and you get a representation of your face kind of out in front of you and also from first person. Set it over you, let go. That's really cool. And then to put it back in, where is it? I guess you take it off of your third person face and just sort of drop it there. That's really great. They've also modeled this stuff since my last review. This would control the brightness of these lights. I don't think that's really working yet, nor is the push to test for the audio, but that's not a big deal. All the rest of these lights work just fine. Okay, all lights off. Down, 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 down. Turn the panel lights all the way off. That's good. Crash lever is down. Starter switch is in the off position, which is middle. Ignition we want auto, and the rest of these we want down, and this one in the middle. Aux BP, fuel selector, AP trims off. Just hide that yoke. The micro mask switch is guarded. De-ice systems down here. Let's zoom in a little bit. They are all off, which is what we want right now. Parking brake, let's set that. So first we need to put the brakes down and then throw this over there to the side to set it, and now they'll be set. Landing gear control is down. Manual override is backwards all the way. Throttle's in cutoff, flaps are up, and we're on either left or right tank. And I will occasionally move this around to off just to make sure all that is moving properly. And up on the environmental control system panel, we want to make sure the AC is off, the bleed is off, pressure mode just stays in auto normally. This dump is guarded. That's to dump pressurization in flight if you had to in an emergency. And these just pretty much stay here. I normally have the hot air flow going to the floor. If you turn it like this, it's going to the windscreen for defrost. And these are just your temperature settings for the cabin. Alternate static is pushed in. Emergency rammer down here is also pushed in. And we would check. Oh, that's cool. I haven't played with that yet. I'll have to do that in a second. We check all the breakers and make sure the fire extinguisher is full, which I can see it pointing to green there. So that's good. Catch up on my checklist. Emergency or central bus tie is in the proper position and guarded. So back to the emergency landing gear extension, it's under here. This needs to be pushed down. If you bring it out, you can actuate this for emergency. And passenger briefing is done. Okay, the next checklist is the starting engine. So let's start up top, make sure the crash lever is up and get things powered up here. We'll do a battery start. And I'm actually simulating part of an Atlantic crossing, so let me figure out my flight plan for today here. I'm going to turn the speaker off so we don't hear everything quite so loud. Okay, so the flight plan, we are going to be leaving Iceland here.
Pause system test. Okay.
And head across this northern part of the Atlantic over to Greenland and stop for fuel. And let's see how far this is. It's not too far. This is 730 miles or so. We'll assume we got the ATIS and startup clearance already. Let's check the panel lights by holding this little white button. And basically all these LEDs in here should light up and you should hear that tone. That's good. Landing gear lights. This checks the other down circuit and it flashes at about 10 Hertz. And then this one's about 1 Hertz and it just checks all the lights on this panel. Fuel on board. We'll verify the values and those are full. That matches what we expect. And normally we would sync that value into the weights page on the G1000, but that's not part of this setup. So screens, we can go to the composite mode, emergency mode for startup. This is handy if we lose a screen during the start. We'll have, if we lost the MFD, for example, we'd be losing important information for the start. And in this situation, with the composite mode going, we could always just glance to the next screen over. All right, residual ITT needs to be less than 150 degrees Celsius, and we're at 15. That looks great. Voltage needs to be greater than 24.5. It's 25.6. Zoom in here. CAS messages, make sure they look correct. Parking brake makes sense. Fuel and oil pressure makes sense. Low voltage makes sense. Auto select for the fuel tanks makes sense, and vacuum low all makes sense. And we don't have any door CAS messages, so those are secure. And then audio alarms we will not test. Okay, so let's turn on the strobes. And because we are on a clean, nice ramp here, we do not need to turn the inertial separator on, and so we won't. Ignition should be to auto. We checked that before, and it still is. Engine instruments are alive. There we go. Voltage is still good. Aux BP. Let's go to on. We'd hear it. And we get the CAS message there. Aux BP boost pump on. Propeller area is clear. Looks good. We will start the timer. Could do the yoke for that. There it goes. And let's do the starter. Hold for 2. Alright, we hear it. And we see starter and ignition. We'll clear that. Oil pressure's coming up. ITT still below 150. NG is greater than 13. Let's go to low idle to introduce fuel. We're watching ITT closely. Put the shocks back on. Forgot those have been taken off. There's the second stage. Starter cutout. It's good. Go up to flight idle. And turn the inertial separator on. Throw these 3 switches all the way up. And we'll jump back to the checklist. Oh, that was done plenty quickly on the timer. We're looking for about 69% NG after it's stabilized, and we're right at that. Inertial separator is on. We'll get a message when it completes its movement to the on position in about 20 more seconds maybe. Aux PP, fuel selector, and AP trims are all up. If the battery is less than 100, there's the inertial sep. If the battery charge is less than 100 amps, it is. We can turn on AC and bleeds. You can see this flashing down here. I thought my throttle was down there. I just needed to bump it a little bit. But this is showing where my physical throttle is, so that I can use that as a reminder to kind of put it in the middle to better simulate this lowercase h pattern here. It's really cool. Alright, let's test that the tank swap works. We're on the left. We'll push this little silver button. Now we're on the right. That's good. CAS messages as expected. We got parking brake, inertial separator, and then the stall pitot heats are not on. Those are all good. CAS messages. Let's turn the headset on. And then I have my own reminder to hook up the Bluetooth. Alright, this would be before taxi. Sometimes I like to position to a different place on the ramp if I'm making a lot of noise near people, but that's not a concern here. We'll set the barrow. I'm just going to cheat and find the field elevation here. It's 45 feet, so we're pretty close here. And I would normally set it up here as well. Flight instruments, they're all alive and look reasonable. We'll see if the DG, the directional compass, is, the HSI is right. Yeah, it looks good. Flight plan, let's do that. Let's bring this up where we can type better. We'll go to flight plan. I need to clear the one that got me here. Normally this would be automatically cleared after a power cycle, but I don't think that X-Plane simulates that right. Okay, now let's type in Bravo Golf Sierra Fox. I'm just using the keyboard for that, which is really handy. Enter. There we go. My heading bug around to that. Alright, LFE, sync it from the flight plan. There should be the system thing here, but what I've found is if I go to flight plan, get that out, I can usually bring that up. And that's just a limitation of X-Plane setup. And we'll pull the landing field elevation from our flight management system. So 165 feet is the elevation in Greenland where we're going. That just tells the system how to program the pressurization schedule. Transponder, we'll just leave it squawking what I believe is the European VFR. I could be wrong there. Call sign. In my plane, there is a call sign value that you can also set down here. So if you're not using your tail as your call sign at times, just want to make sure that it's on the correct thing because it does remember whatever you had last. Flight controls, test our freedom. Can't see the elevator from this seat here, but you just make sure everything moves without fighting you. Trims, see if we can interrupt them. I've actually never tried to test this in here because it kind of requires two hands, but you would hold this up and then you'd push the red button while you're doing that to make sure it stops the trims. And now let's put it back. Oh, that's cool. I like how they simulated the wheel there. Just go in the green area. For the rudder trim, normally we would do it in between the white and the green. In this sim, I just tend to do it kind of in the middle. And the aileron's fine, it's good there. Flaps are up. DI system tests the boots. Okay, throw that on. They've modeled that out here where it inflates. And you look for the, I missed that green light, but you look for the green light. This is the only real indication that the pressure in the boots has hit the right level. If, for example, you had a hole in one of the tail boots, this would help you realize that, even though you can't really see the tail. And then the prop de-ice, that goes on for, I forget how many seconds. I should know that, but something like 70-80 seconds, and then it's off for like a very short period, and it cycles to the next set of prop de-ice boots, heating elements. Windshield, that's automatically temperature controlled. Those came on, so that's all good. Oh, the prompt blinks at 90 seconds. If I just looked at my checklist like a smart person, I would have that there. Alright, test the feather. Really, this is just to get some oil moving into the propeller hub and make sure that that the feather switch is working. There's an electric switch that you're hitting when you move this over to tell it to go into feather, and we do that twice. Oh, that was an accident. Alright, and now we go back. That's good. Cast messages still look good. Turn our taxi light on. Parking brake off, and then brakes and steering, test them on the roll. out of taxi range on the throttle. Hold the brakes, set the brakes, clear that master caution or master warning. Okay, back to our checklist. Parking brake set, ignition should be auto, and it is. Aux BP, fuel selector, and AP trims are all up. Inertial separator on, and we have our CAS message for that. Trims are set. Environmental panel all up. An exception could be AC if you want to do it in manual mode. And when you do that, that just means you're manually controlling the fan speed instead of letting it automatically do it based on your temperature setting. Battery charging is at less than 50 amps. That's one of the requirements before taking off, and also before you test the standby alternator. So we turn that on, we should get a main gen CAS. We do, but the generator should pick up the load, and it is 32 amps. That's actually the alternator now. Let's make sure I hit the right switch, which I didn't. There we go. I accidentally turned the battery off for a second there. LFE does show the destination airport. It looks good. Fuel quantity and balance is fine. Engine instruments, good. CAS display, that makes sense. Transponder squawks fine. Passengers table stowed. Did we put it back? Looks good. Flaps to take off. So we drop that down to take off, and then we make sure that that reflects it as well. Landing lights on. Alright, so a takeoff briefing here. We got our heading bug set. We're going to climb to 30,000 feet. So we're going westbound. And we have 5,140 feet here, and we won't even need half of that. There's no crosswind right now. The winds are calm. The initial departure procedure, our goal is going to just be to pretty much climb out and turn to our final heading here and go straight to flight level 300. And if we have any issues while on the ground before we rotate at 85 knots, we'll keep it on the ground. And if we have engine power, we will use engine braking, otherwise just wheel brakes. And up to 1,000 feet AGL, which would be just over 1,000 MSL. If we have trouble then, we're pretty much landing straight ahead or close to straight ahead. And above that, we will do a quick 45-degree turn to the right, very briefly, 45 degrees of heading change, and then we will come back around more than 180 degrees to try to get lined up opposite direction to land back on this same piece of pavement. And if we have raised the gear by then, which would be very likely, we'll need to remember to put that back down. In addition, if we have any trouble with the engine, first thing we want to think about is, can we use the manual override? So maybe it's just a fuel controller problem if these two spool down, but these two still look like we've got engine operation. We will attempt to use that to see if we can fix it, assuming we have enough time. Alright, turn on our pitot stall heaters. We check our flaps and trims. Those look good. Our fuel is on a good tank. Our lights are set. Yaw damper will come on later. Toga button press and inertial separator is on. Okay, parking brake off, and we'll do our takeoff here. Alright, let's take a look on final.
Approaching runway 01.
Alright, we're approaching.
Entered runway 01. 5,200 feet remaining.
We're going to do our engine checks on the roll here instead of stopping. We're going to go up to 40% and make sure all the engine instruments are green, and that the CAS messages make sense, which we can check that now, and they do. Just want the inertial separator for takeoff. So here we go. %, or close to it. Got all green, oil pressures, temps look good. Let's work it on up to 90%. Especially in the last bit of the throttle movement, it's very fast, so you kind of go slow on the throttle. And if you get close, that's good. Alright, we're past 85, we should be rotating. Here we go. Alright, we've got a positive rate on the PFD, positive rate of climb. And I would normally kind of look over the nose, but we'll say that that's all the runway. Bring up the gear. Now we lower the nose a little bit to get to 115 knots or better, and raise the flaps. Turn on the yaw damper. And once we're over 400 or 500 AGL, we'll start turning to our heading here, and I'll use the flight director to help me out. Trips I like to kind of fly the first 1,000 feet just to get a little hand flying in. Let's get a direct course from here. So I hit direct 2, enter. You would normally, I think I have to hit it twice, but I guess the X-Plane G1000 is a little different there. And we will hit nav mode to track that. Anytime you make a change up here on the autopilot, even if the lights light up, you need to always check it right here on the PFD. I've been, in real planes, especially in the Cirrus. I mean, it has the same panel, but I've pushed that button and I've felt it click and it not actually take effect. And if you don't check over here, I mean, the lights should match, but you should always check over here to make sure that what you think it's doing is what it thinks it's doing. All right, so at this point, it's not a ton for us to do. We're usually working with ATC on our departure here. Once we get above 5,000 roughly AGL, turn the inertial separator off, and we should see the torque go from about 80 to maybe 95, a little higher, or so about 15% increase on its own as it starts to breathe better during the 40-second cycle of the inertial separator getting out of the airstream. So transition altitude in this near this airport is 7,000. So once we get past that,
climbing through transition altitude.
Standard barrow setting there. And I usually just leave the backup on whatever the last real value I had was. If you need to in flight, in the flight levels you can push, I think it's S really quickly to get it to go to standard, but I usually just leave it there, and then once I get the ATIS weather at the destination, I'll still be probably on standard barrow or close, some other setting at that point, but I can go ahead and put it in here almost like a scratch pad to save that number for me to remember later. Throughout the flight, what we're mostly doing is monitoring everything in this block here, especially the upper area, making sure the engine's happy and that it's still in the settings you expect it to be, making sure the pressurization is doing what you expect, and that the fuel levels are also doing what you expect, and that they're staying balanced. Alright, through 10,000 feet, I like to double check the pressurization. I like to double check that the oxygen tank has an appropriate PSI value, which is in this range is totally normal. That'll go down naturally as the tank gets cold in the outside air during the climb. And then also make sure that I did not forget to turn the pilot oxygen switch on, so we'll just confirm that. So the mask will have oxygen if we need them. We also need to work the throttle up bit by bit as we climb, because we naturally lose torque in the thinner air. So let's do our climb checklist. Could have done this earlier. Landing gear is up. No bad lights. We would have noticed that. Flaps are up. All dampers on. Normally for the lights, I'll go to taxi mode and go to pulse. Let's take a look at that. So you can see this inner one stays lit up and these outer two sets of 6 flash. Climb speed, I'm probably climbing, well, 140 is not bad. I usually work it up to a faster climb as I go, kind of usually just 5 knots at a time until I get to 170. And then around 24,000 we'll switch to Mach climb using the speed button and climb at Mach 0.4 for the rest of the climb. Alright, ECS panel. We just make sure that everything's set like we need it. Just kind of a double check, and then around 10,000 you want to start working this up to more of the 2 o'clock position. You want to stay ahead of it on the heat, because otherwise the cabin can get pretty cold. If you wait to turn it up to your cold, you're actually cold, it's too late. Alright, fuel gauges still balanced. Are we feeding from the fullest tank? We are. If we were not, we would just hit the shift button to toggle over to the other tank and restart the automatic timer. Radar mode, I have not played with that in here. Let's do that. So we use the little knob to go to weather radar, mode, weather. I need to check that. That might be backwards. I thought you had to push up to lower the tilt, but maybe I'm wrong. Alright, let's bring it down and see if we can see some ground. There we go. It's all water out here, so there's not much to see. But that would be the... that's cool, yeah, that's the tip of Iceland out here. It's great. Okay, let's hold clear and we'll go back to the standard page. De-icing, we don't need anything but our pitot install heaters. Pressurization, we did check that. So we're at 5,200 foot cabin altitude. It's climbing at 510 feet per minute. The differential pressure is working its way up to 6.0 pounds per square inch. Looks good. Inertial separator as desired. We're in clear air here, so we do not need it. So we can maximize our performance. And then I would monitor guard on COM 2. Okay, we're ready for the cruise. They've had the front modeled really well for quite a while, but they've worked on the doors, all the detail there, some cup holders complete with coffee, things like the fire extinguisher and belts and so forth. Showed you the emergency landing gear extension earlier. We looked at the rear seats a bit. Modeled the emergency oxygen masks for the passengers back here. So these lights work. Once you turn on cabin, then your passengers can turn on the lights. And these are their air vents up here too. There's even some lights in the cargo area. They got a cargo net installed. They've modeled this little sort of lip or inverse shelf where there's some air intake, and I think some exhaust for the bleed system as well. These stairs are folded up nicely. They've got the back environmental system controls. So these don't actually do anything, but what you would normally do is for this outer knob here, you would put it to cabin to allow them to control the back I always leave it on the cockpit and just manage it for them. Theoretically, if you had it on cabin and they called for a lot of heat, it might it might move the engine ITT and maybe even the torque, and it might catch you off guard. Or they more likely they don't realize they need to put the heat on earlier and kind of work it in slowly, and so they might get cold not realizing how they have to operate it. Okay, we can go to Mach mode up this high. Plug in 0.4. So in the real plane here, you would have a little bar that would show you kind of where to set the power, and it's probably your max power at this altitude, 26. I'm just trying to go from memory, but it's probably more like low 90s. But once the max power allowed is less than 100, you can basically set it there, and the natural progression of the torque coming down with your climb will basically go with the max setting. So once you get it there, you can set it, and then it'll pretty much just stay there. And really, even through cruise, you'll level off, and the power will come up a couple of percent, maybe a couple of points, and that'll be the normal cruise setting, which is the bottom of the white box that's not shown here. Okay, 1,000 feet to go. So as far as running the cruise checklist, what I normally do is wait for an alert that comes up that talks about that you've entered cruise phase 1. But in this situation, we'll just go ahead and run it. It's pretty simple. So a lot of the stuff you just continuously check as you go anyway. So pressurization, we are right at 6.0. That's very typical. And 9,300 makes sense for flight level 300. Fuel gauges check. They're balanced. We're on the fullest tank. We are. Fuel expected to destination, that's normally what I have up in these magenta blocks. This fuel symmetry, we already checked that. De-icing, we're good. Throttle adjust. Okay, well, I'm going to end this video here, and we'll pick up the next one on the approach into Greenland. Thanks for watching.